VDX-23, Canadian Canal, sailing vessel Wind Shadow. I'm on the wrong channel. VDX-23, Canadian Canal, this is sailing vessel Wind Shadow 114.
Wind Shadow, VDX-23, go ahead.
Yes, sir. We're a 40-foot sailboat requesting upbound passage. We're just leaving Camp Marina.
Okay, if you want to make your way over here right now, I can take you up on the station and small countdown.
All right, appreciate that. And we're expecting a starboard tie. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Wind Shadow standing by in 14.
Hello, and welcome to another GLCC podcast. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Rob, and we're back with another video. And we're going to talk again today about the Great Lakes Cruising Club School. And wow, are we in full steam here at the GLCC school. We've had in the recording library, you've got now cruising guides. So there's Georgian Bay, there's cruising guides on Northern Georgian Bay, the North Channel. We've got a whole 5-part series on Lake Superior that you can sign up for. So cruising guides are starting to fill out. And we've got a lot on the skill side as well, Kelly.
Marine diesel engines, a whole 5-part series on
diesel maintenance. That's right. There's a weather series, and of course we've got some information about marine communications. And we saw a little example of that in the open.
Yeah, there was a lot going on in that little clip. You were trying to queue up for the locks, the Canadian locks. Yeah. You were leaving the marina. You were looking out for all the traffic, and when you hailed the lockmaster,
I tried to hail him on the hailing frequency, channel 16, and they don't answer on 16. So this is something I knew because I read it right there in the harbor report for GLCC. But quickly I realized that I was on 16, switched over to 14, and then hailed the Canadian lockmaster, and he came right back. And so,
of course, we've been in much more stressful situations than that. That you saved the day on that one. But I recall finding ourselves, speaking of marine communications, finding ourselves in a very heavy fog coming from the North Channel all the way across Lake Huron to Presqu'île in Michigan.
Right. We were heading out of Meldrum Bay, southbound crossing Lake Huron, and the fog rolled in, and now we couldn't see 10 feet in front of the boat. We're cruising at 6.5 knots. There's still a lot of wind. It's amazing that the wind can be up, but still there's a lot of fog.
Well, we had ordered an AIS, ordered AIS equipment, and it had arrived, but we could transmit, but we couldn't. No, we could receive, but we couldn't transmit.
Right.
And so when we looked at what was happening in the CPA, we saw that a very large freighter was going to collide with us. The CPA was going to be in 3 hours, and it was only going to be about 300 feet away.
Right. The AIS will tell you the closest point of approach, the CPA, as you said, and also tells you some static information about the vessels. And the Baikamau, by the way, is 750 feet long. So 300-foot CPA won't work.
Now, we could have just adjusted our course, but instead we decided to use another piece of marine equipment, the radio.
Right.
And Rob called the Baikamau, and he had all the information because AIS had all that information.
Yeah, see, if you ever tried to hail a freighter, if you try to sort of do that without just say, hey, boat, heading south or something like that, they may not respond. But I was able to hail Baikamau, sailing vessel Wind Shadow 116. And when you say it like that, they come right back.
Long story short, a very nice man with a French accent, very nice. He was Canadian. got right back to us, and Rob explained the situation, said, these are our coordinates. This is where we're heading. This is where you're heading. And he said, I'll get right back to you, which he did.
Came back in about 15 minutes.
And I figured he'd tell us that we
Get
had
out
to
of the way.
change our course. But instead, he graciously said, and we've just adjusted our course 3 degrees to the south, and we will now miss you by half a mile.
Yep. And about 3 hours later, the fog parted. And there was the Baikal. It just passed in front of us, and we were still on course and maintained our speed and course into Presqu'île. And so it was important pieces of equipment there with AIS and the VHF radio. And we want to talk a little bit more about marine communications tonight. And we have with us an expert.
And Christian Sandvig, our expert, has put together 2 comprehensive webinars for the GLCC school, how to use your VHS radio, and the other one is how to choose the right marine communications equipment for your boat.
And Christian's in our studio.
That's right. And I'd like...
Hi there, Kelly and Rob.
Hey,
Hi,
welcome.
Christian. I'd like to tell a little bit about you and then turn it over to you. We're so grateful that you came and did these webinars. Christian is a professor at the University of Michigan, a member of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. He's cruised the Great Lakes, the Pacific Northwest, Mid-Atlantic, Mediterranean, and he's taught courses on radio communication for over 20 years. Now, he knows all about the latest technology and what equipment is right for every situation. And we welcome you, Christian. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into marine communication and maybe a little bit about your boat history?
Sure, it's nice to be here. I mean, the short version is I just really love boats, and I also love radio. So my father's side of my family are commercial fishermen, and so growing up, being around that, I think introduced me to boating, and that was in the Pacific Northwest. And then after that, my father did some sailing on the San Francisco Bay. And when I chose a career, I chose communication, and I was interested in radio. So it's been a while now, but when I started as a professor, the research that I did in the first maybe 10 years of my job was all about radio. And so probably my really obscure claim to fame that nobody cares about except maybe boaters is that one of the things I used to do is I would train graduate students to go to this special conference that they have called the World Radio Communications Conference with the State Department. And that's the conference where they decide how many VHF channels there should be for boats and what they ought to be and how they should work and what they ought to be used for. So I ended up volunteering for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. One of the things that I've done for them is to answer Mayday calls, to listen for Mayday calls in the communications center. So that's probably relevant. My partner and I have a trawler, and it's a 63-foot custom, sort of needs some work kind of a trawler. And we bought it as a project during the pandemic to fix it up. And it's been a joy and very complicated.
Well, that would certainly give you a lot more practical experience in finding just the right equipment for a boat of that size.
Yeah, it has a really large number of radios on board, but most of them are in boxes and disconnected. And it's got all kinds of extra radio projects that I'm going to get to any day.
Now, the first one of your webinars, one of the most popular webinars, I would say, is how to talk on a marine radio. I suppose most everybody that cruises the Great Lakes has one, but not everybody knows how to use it just to the best effect. What can you tell us about that webinar?
Well, I volunteered to teach some of the boating courses, and one of the courses I taught was about radio for the power squadrons, and that was at the Detroit Yacht Club. And when I taught these courses, one of the things that really struck me is that everyone was afraid of talking on the radio. I mean, it just, I think the number one request I would get every session would be, we did some sort of practice talking on the radio, and they said, can we do more practice talking on the radio? And so really, I mean, everyone in the boat should know, obviously, how to call distress, but you really should know how to use the radio just in a general sense. And that includes calling your friend's boat correctly and, talking to the lock tender, or the drawbridge tender, or calling the marina. And so you should know how to do these things. And so the course is just basically designed to take the edge off a little bit. So I have some scripts that I wrote up over the years that gives you some examples, and then we'll do a little, maybe a few, skits. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Do a few skits, maybe listen to some real radio traffic, go through some examples. That's the plan.
It seems like every time I go to use that radio, and luckily it's never been in a stressful situation, but I get stressed out anyway because I'm not quite sure if I'm going to do it right. So
And
practice.
it feels like everyone's listening. So you get that hesitation right when you're about to press the button on the mic, right? Like, am I going to say the right thing, or is this the right channel, or did I press the right button? And yeah.
Well, and as members of the Great Lakes Cruising Club, we want to be good examples out there on the water. And so it's important to have good etiquette and really know how to communicate on that VHF radio.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could also probably do another hour class called How to Listen to the Radio. I mean, it's actually more to learn than you would think, and it's quite difficult to understand what's happening. So one of the things you hear is all kinds of disastrously bad radio communication if you have your radio turned on. And I mean, the simplest thing is just can't even understand half the people. It's kind of like, but even then, people who don't know the radio procedures or what they're supposed to be doing or what channels for what, or even the really basic stuff.
Well, now we've talked about a few of our semi-crisis situations. Do you have any war stories you can share with us about using the radio or not using it?
I mean, I guess the war story, the most shocking war stories really come from the Coast Guard training, because those involve real Mayday situations, and they're sometimes chilling, but they're really helpful because you see, what could be, what exactly could have been done better, and you can learn from them. And so I usually try to include some of them recordings from real situations in the class. So as one example, I mean, there's a pretty famous example of a chilling story, actually, which is, I think it was the fishing vessel Scandy's Rose, I think it was. I'm not remembering the name, but it was on the show The Deadliest Catch. So many more people know about it than might otherwise know about it. But the thing that's chilling about it is that, many recreational boaters, I'm not saying Kelly and Rob, but many recreational boaters might have a VHF radio, and they have a modern one, but they never connect it properly. So the instructions say that, the modern VHF should be connected to a GPS, and, it has to have an identification number programmed into it. And many boaters just don't bother. I mean, you see it all the time. They just don't bother to do that step. So the people on the fishing vessel Scandy's Rose did not do that step. And they had a stability problem due to bad weather, due to icing. This was in Alaska. And then when they tried to call on the radio for help, the conditions were very poor, and stability problems can result in a capsize very quickly. So you have very, very small amount of time. So the interesting thing about this case is that the Coast Guard actually issued a special advisory just recently to warn people how dangerous it is to leave your radio basically not installed all the way because you didn't connect it to the GPS. So if you didn't connect it, you can't use that red button, the red button that says distress. So unfortunately, the Scandy's Rose capsized with loss of life, and the loss of life was the person who was speaking on the radio, and he felt that he had to keep speaking on the radio to convey the latitude and longitude. But of course, it would have been conveyed automatically if he could have pressed that button. That's conveyed automatically your location. That's the reason for the button and for the system. And so in that situation, the Coast Guard, they didn't quite say it in the advisory, but he needed the seconds mattered at that moment, and he should have connected that. So that's an example. I mean, there's, not to be dark. I'm suddenly talking about very serious things on your lighthearted podcast, but I think that's, one of the reasons we want to pay some attention to the communication topic.
Well, this is a good segue to talking about your other webinar, which is entitled Outfitting Your Boat for the Great Lakes. And I understand you're going to give us some updates as to what's out there these days and what we should be doing, maybe taking an audit of what we have on our boat. Can you tell us a little bit about what you'll cover in that webinar?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really more of a tasting menu where you get to learn what's been going on, because there've been a bunch of really neat innovations in marine communications lately. I mean, everything from the fact that some models of iPhone now have satellite communication and distress built into them, and people own these and don't know about that, or the fact that you can now do really interesting things like just a couple of years ago, they started building the first handheld AIS receiver into a VHF. So you could have like a kayaker who would have a proximity alarm when a freighter was coming up behind them. I mean, that's something that we've never really had. It wasn't possible. Other things like some radios now allow you to pair your cell phone with the radio so that you can talk on the radio, but you're actually using your phone. And that is really important because you can keep your phone in a waterproof bag. So it's good if you're on a small boat or, as I said earlier, a kayak. So, stuff like that. Things like many people are familiar with PLBs, the satellite rescue beacons that are really popularized by hikers, but a lot of boaters swear by them as well. So we now have the two-way PLB, and most people aren't familiar with that. Used to be just one way. So there's a lot of stuff just in the last few years. So it might be worth taking a moment to review your communication needs and see if there's anything that meets them. Like, we have dogs on our boat, and I'm constantly searching for dog overboard solutions.
Will you be having any handouts, any checklists or worksheets that somebody could use to try to do a little audit?
Sure. I mean, I think the most useful handouts I have those scripts for the how to talk on the radio class. Other than that, I think for the equipment class, it's mainly just my slides, but I'm happy to share them.
That's awesome. So let me just remind our viewers how to check into these webinars at the Great Lakes Cruising Club School. It's glccschool.com, glccschool.com. The instructor is Christian Sandvig. The webinars are Marine Communications, How to Talk on a Marine Radio, very important one. And the second one, Outfitting Your Boat for the Great Lakes. Christian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
What a pleasure.
And I am so grateful that our founding fathers decided to make all these school webinars available as recordings, because this way, whether you watch the live webinar or not, you can at any time download the recording. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be watching Christian Sandvig's recordings more than once. So I really appreciate that we can do that. And so I really urge all of our viewers to sign up for every single pertinent school webinar that they can. Even if you can't make the live presentation, you will be glad that you have the recording.
Thanks again for joining us, Christian.
Thank you very much.
See you out on the water.
Bye-bye.